In the last part of the 20th century, a brutal 8-year war broke out that would go on to define an entire nation. But this wasn't just about fighting over land. We're going to dive into how the Iran-Iraq War became the very furnace where the identity of the modern Islamic Republic of Iran was forged.
We will resist aggression until victory. Now, that was Iran's official line put out there almost the second the war began in 1980. It sounds simple, right? But that one sentence holds the entire ideological blueprint for the next 8 years. We're going to unpack it later, but for now, just let the weight of that promise sink in.
All right, so let's get right into it. If you really want to understand modern Iran, you absolutely have to understand this war. It wasn't just a conflict for the nation, it was a conflict that literally created the nation's modern identity.
And that, right there, is the core idea we're digging into. You know, you might think it was the revolution that came before it, but really, it was the 8-year war with Iraq that fundamentally shaped the political DNA of the Islamic Republic. It was like an internal catalyst, forging a brand new national identity in the fire of conflict.
So how in the world does a war do something so profound? Well, part of the answer is just its sheer length. I mean, this was no short, sharp clash. It was a grueling 8-year marathon that completely reshaped an entire society from the ground up. From 1980 to 1988. 8 full years. Just think about that for a second. An entire generation grew up knowing nothing else but a state of total war. And when a fight goes on for that long, it doesn't just stay on the front lines. It seeps into the very fabric of society, its culture, its politics, everything.
Okay, so let's circle back to that vow we heard right at the start. That wasn't just some political slogan. Every single word was chosen for a reason, and by breaking it down, we can basically see the entire ideological foundation of Iran's war effort.
Here it is again. We will resist aggression until victory. You've got two incredibly powerful ideas packed into just 7 words. So let's take the first one, aggression.
Using that specific word, aggression, is so important here. By framing the whole thing as a response to aggression, the narrative is set immediately. This isn't a war of choice. It's not about expansion. No, this is a sacred duty to defend the homeland and the ideals of their recent revolution. And that framing, it justifies any sacrifice and gets the whole population on board for a defensive fight to the end.
And now for the back half, resist until victory. This isn't just a military strategy, you know, it's an ideological command. It's basically saying there will be no compromise, no negotiated peace, no backing down. It's a promise of total war, demanding every ounce of the nation's resources and spirit until some final, undefined victory is won.
So what's the long-term fallout when a nation lives and breathes by that vow for 8 brutal years? Well, that brings us to the war's most lasting legacy, its impact on the country's politics, an impact that is still powerfully felt to this day.
A spirit of total, uncompromising resistance. That's a really powerful force. But you have to ask, what kind of leaders does that create? What kind of political climate does it build for the decades that follow?
You can pretty much draw a straight line here. First, the war creates this national identity built on defiance. Then, in that kind of atmosphere, where any kind of compromise looks like weakness, it's the most uncompromising voices that start to gain all the power. And the logical result of that is the cementing and long-term strengthening of hardline leadership.
So if there's one thing to take away, it's this. The Iran-Iraq War was not just a military event, not even close. It was a political furnace. It hardened ideologies. It empowered a very specific kind of unbending leader, and it ultimately set the political course for the Islamic Republic for decades. And all of this leaves us with a much bigger question, doesn't it? Whether we're talking about a revolution or a defensive war, how does a nation's defining struggle, its trial by fire, end up shaping its character, its politics, and how it deals with the rest of the world for generations to come?